Good afternoon, everyone. I hate to interrupt your conversations, but I don't. If you don't mind, I think in the interest of time, we're going to get started now. We want to be respectful of your time and get you out of here today on time. Please continue to eat your meals, but if you don't mind, we'd ask that you please hold your conversations as we begin our program. And out of courtesy for our speakers, I'd ask that you please take your cell phones and either turn them off or put them on silent mode. So good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Roy Nascimento. I have the privilege and honor of serving as the President and CEO of the North Central Massachusetts Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of our Board of Directors and staff of the Chamber, I'd like to welcome you to our 2024 Congressional Luncheon. Today is about connection, collaboration, and progress. And we are here today to bridge the gap between the Capitol Hill and our main streets here in North Central Massachusetts, and to ensure that the voice of North Central Massachusetts resonates in Washington, D.C. And I'd be remiss if I didn't start off by expressing our sincere thank you to U.S. Representative Jim McGovern of the 2nd District and U.S. Representative Laurie Trahan of the 3rd District for their commitment to participate every year in this Congressional Luncheon. They've been terrific about engaging locally with their business constituents and business and community leaders here. Jim and Laurie, thank you for your commitment to our region. Your presence here speaks volumes. How about a round of applause? So the importance of this event cannot be overstated. In today's rapidly changing economic and political landscape, it's vital that our local business community has an opportunity to engage with our federal representatives. And we're only able to host these types of impactful events with the support of our members. With that said, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank several of our members who helped make today's program possible through their sponsorship and financial support. I'd like to start by thanking our premier sponsor, Fitchburg State University. Recognizing the importance of this forum, Fitchburg State stepped forward as the founding sponsor when we first launched this event nearly 10 years ago. And I thank them for their commitment and long-standing support. And you'll hear in a little bit from Dr. Donna Hodge, president of Fitchburg State. But I'd like to, at this point, ask for a round of applause for their support. I'd also like to take a moment and acknowledge and thank our supporting sponsors, Care Central VNA and Hospice. We have some folks here from Care Central. And Central Mass Productions. They stepped forward this year to support this program, and we are very grateful for their support and active involvement. I would like to ask for a round of applause for both organizations. Thank you again to all of our sponsors. Their support reflects their dedication to our communities, their commitment to the Chamber and to our members, and their support of civic engagement. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Leominster Access Television. LTV is here today recording the program, right over here, and it will be airing in Leominster and neighboring communities. Thank you to the entire team at LTV for extending our reach beyond these walls today. Can we have a round of applause for LTV? So before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to highlight some special guests, our elected officials and appointed officials who have joined us here today. So I have here on my list, so we have Governor's Counselor Paul DiPaolo is here. Thank you for joining us. State Representative Mike Kuchmarek is here. Mayor of Fitchburg, Sam Squalia is here. Westminster Town Administrator Stephanie Lattin is here. And from the office of Senator Robin Kennedy, Giselle Rivera Flores is here. And I also want to acknowledge former State Senator Jen Flanagan is here today, so thank you, Jen. And I apologize if we missed anyone, if there's any elected officials. Leanne Scales will be serving as our MC this afternoon. Leanne is the director of the North Central Massachusetts Coalition for Employer-Supported Childcare and will serve as our MC. She'll be coming up shortly. In addition to the questions that we've prepared as the chamber, you'll find these cards on your table. And these are for you to provide any questions that you might have. So if you have any questions, take a moment, fill them out, and then just raise your hand and someone from the chamber staff will collect them, turn these into Leanne, and if we have enough time, we're hoping to ask both members of our congressional delegation the questions. We'll do our best to get through as many as we can. Before Leanne comes up, I'd like to wrap up my portion of the program by introducing Fitchburg State University's president, Dr. Donna Hodge. President Hodge is Fitchburg State's newly appointed president and comes to North Central Massachusetts with a wealth of knowledge and insight. And we are excited to welcome here today to our Congressional Luncheon here from North Central Massachusetts. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Donna Hodge with a big round of applause.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. I'm just always struck by how many new friends I meet at every new event. It has been a whirlwind 4 months. The opportunity today for me is also, in addition to meeting new people, is to reconnect with many of you who have made me and my husband feel so incredibly welcome as newcomers to this region. Tomorrow marks my 100th day as president of Fitchburg State University. Thank you. I'm delighted to share that the warm and caring community I encountered as a finalist for this post in the spring has now become home. We are unpacked and everything. So it's been an absolute privilege to learn from the students, the faculty, librarians, staff, alumni, including some double Falcons in this room, that important role that Fitchburg State plays in their lives and in their development as citizens and leaders. In fact, you'll notice that our Fitchburg State table, full of amazing student leaders. Thanks to them for being here and for all they do to make this job so meaningful. I also want to thank the leaders in this room who've made clear to me the importance that Fitchburg State has to the health and vitality of North Central Massachusetts and the surrounding region. Be assured that I take that responsibility very seriously. As you're all likely aware, higher ed is at a critical juncture. Demographic changes and cultural forces are affecting colleges and universities across the country, certainly right here in New England. I'm very proud to share that Fitchburg State has begun the fall semester very strong. We've exceeded our budget targets for incoming students, and I can confirm the campus is humming with activity. We welcomed an increasingly diverse class of incoming students, with almost half belonging to underrepresented groups. Of that group this year, 24% now identify as Hispanic or Latinx, which reflects our continued trend toward becoming a formally recognized and designated Hispanic serving institution. This is good news. This is good news for all of us. That designation, as many of you know, will actually open the doors to new national collaborations, new federal funding, and elevated opportunities for first-generation, Pell-eligible, and minoritized student populations. It also means that we have to recommit as an institution, as a region, to serving all students and their evolving needs. To help us do this work, I'm committed to building upon strong collaborations that have existed between Fitchburg State and significant community partners, many of whom are in the room today, in fact. In some cases, that means formalizing in writing, which had, for those things that had for many years actually been handshake arrangements, in order to make those important collaborations truly person-proof. It also means exploring new ways to work together in service of this entire region and our shared objective to move North Central Massachusetts forward. Our role in North Central Mass is especially critical because studies repeatedly show that the graduates of our regional state public institutions stay local and they become the backbones of this community. I've already told my team at Fitchburg State that my goal is nothing less than becoming the first choice institution for students in this region who are looking to further their education. I want to thank Roy and his team at the Chamber for creating this amazing opportunity today, to give us this opportunity to engage with one another, to have conversations just like the one we'll have in a moment. I especially want to thank our legislators and other representatives who have gathered today to hear from all of us. Thank you so much, and go Fitchburg State. Wasn't she great? We have nothing but good news for the city of Fitchburg and that great university. My name is Leanne Scales. Thank you, Roy, for having me today. It is my honor to be interviewing our two guests this morning. We couldn't be more fortunate to have the representation we do in Congress. So let's hear about them. First, Congressman McGovern, elected in 1996. I was there that night, that was fun. He has been the top Democrat on the powerful House Rules Committee since 2018. He chaired during the 116th and 117th Congress. He also serves on the House Agriculture Committee, where you've seen him, a global leader on hunger. And how many times have you seen him in our community, right? He has spent his career in public service, working to strengthen America's global leadership when it comes to protecting human rights and promoting peace. He serves on 2 commissions which monitor, investigate, and advocate on behalf of international human rights: the rule of law, good governance, the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and the bipartisan Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Thank you for being here, Congressman McGovern. And Congresswoman Lori Trahan, what a leader she has come. In just her 3rd term, she is making such a mark. I'm so proud of her. Congresswoman Trahan proudly represents Massachusetts' 3rd Congressional District, made up of 35 cities and towns, including her hometown of Lowell. The granddaughter of immigrants, Lori grew up in a working-class family with her dad working long, hard hours as a union iron worker, and her mom juggling part-time jobs while caring for her and her 3 sisters. I bet childcare is important to Lori. She earned a volleyball scholarship to Georgetown University, where she became the first person in her family to graduate from college. Lori decided to run for Congress in 2018, the first time she'd ever sought public office, because she wanted to expand economic opportunities for families like hers. She serves as a member of the House Energy Commerce Committee and in leadership roles as co-chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, senior whip, and a member of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee. Please join me in welcoming Congressman McGovern and Congresswoman Trahan.
Testing. I just need a bigger voice. Okay. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to start with childcare selfishly because I'm going to ask everybody in here, how many of you or a family member are struggling with childcare right now? Raise your hands. That's good to know. So the North Central Mass Coalition for Childcare is working on a regional model where parents, wow. Oh, that's the cord. Where parents and employers and the government is going to share in childcare costs so that we can have a better workforce. I want to thank Roy Nascimento, he serves on our coalition. I want to thank CEO of United Way, Corey Yang, because he is our fiscal home. And I want to thank Mike Palladino, who probably didn't know I was going to ask him to raise his hand, from Solvis Global, a company that has stepped up to the table and is paying for childcare next year. So thank you. And right now, 24% of most families' income goes to childcare. I don't have to tell you how bad it is. I have more stats, but we don't have a lot of time. So I want to talk to both of you about what you see as the federal role in supporting employer-supported childcare.
Well, thank you, Leanne. And I think it's fitting that that's the first question because one of my first visits out to Wachusett was to go visit C Campus and the child care infrastructure that was housed at Wachusett Community College because that really gave people the ability to go to school with having the peace of mind of knowing that their children would be taken care of. So great program, and it's one of the programs that we should plow more money into to make it more, just more scale across the country in our community colleges. We have some pretty great programs to expand the affordability of childcare. I think one of them is the expanded child tax credit. During COVID, we increased that up to $3,600, and it impacted 100 million families in our country. So I do think we need to get back to, an expanded child tax credit, which I know Jim and I have both supported, even in this most recent bipartisan tax relief package. But one of the things that folks really grapple with is many times the healthcare providers can't afford, not the healthcare providers, the child care providers, they don't get paid a wage where they can afford child care. And so we really need to use the earned income tax credit, which is really geared toward our lower wage workers, so that they have the ability to access childcare. But look, I think this is one of those issues where we have to be really bold. Last session of Congress, we really wanted to make childcare part of infrastructure, right? It's not just about the buildings and the roads and the bridges. It's about the people, and are they going to be able to show up for work? And what do we need to do to make sure? I mean, this just isn't a woman's issue. It is a family issue, and frankly, it's an economic issue. So I do look forward to this next Congress. Lot riding, of course, on the next few weeks, but I think that we're going to pick up where we left off in terms of making child care a priority in the country.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't tell everybody that it was Congressman McGovern that introduced Solvis Global to us, so you brought them to the table. Congressman?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Laurie. Well, first of all, it's great to see everybody, and I want to thank Roy and the Chamber. I want to thank Fitchburg State University and Care Central VNA and Hospice, Inc., and Central Mass Productions for sponsoring this. And I promised everybody that Laurie and I would not give you indigestion during our presentations, but please feel free to eat. And when I speak, you can feel free to drink. I sound better. So, but I mean, I just will say ditto to everything Laurie just said. Look, childcare is expensive. And for those who are representing businesses here, it's always a struggle to find workers. And oftentimes, one of the problems is that people make a decision that it is more economical to stay home and not participate in the workforce because they can't afford the child care. And so, we need the expanded child tax credit. We need the earned income tax credit. And we also need to make sure on the federal level we're supporting things like Head Start. One of the things that we are confronting right now is a majority in the House that, quite frankly, is making deep cuts in Head Start. It makes absolutely no sense, no matter how you look at it. Our children are 100% of our future. And if we neglect them at the early stages, we pay for it later on. So, there needs to be more federal attention, working with the states as well, and working with the business community to figure this out. But clearly, I mean, as Laurie mentioned, we actually did in the House pass a child tax credit bill that unfortunately the Senate hasn't taken up yet. But my hope is that if we don't deal with it in an omnibus bill, that it'd be one of the first things up when we come back.
Thank you. And I know you both have taken countless questions on inflation. And the good news is it continues to cool, but people are still struggling to make ends meet, the cost of groceries, cost of gas. Tell us a little bit about what the Congress is doing and setting up in the next session to address inflation.
So one of the things that we all should appreciate is that COVID had a very disruptive impact on the global economy. And of all countries in the world, we are combating inflation most effectively. It is still too high, but it's coming down. And you see it, tick down a little bit every time we see the latest inflation restrictions. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is important because among the many things it addresses is the issue of energy, which it actually can fuel inflation if energy costs rise, and it impacts everything. And in that Inflation Reduction Act is the biggest investment to help make us energy independent in our history. And so the goal ought to be for us to get energy right, to get it right in a way that we also combat climate change. You see the storms that are hitting the Gulf Coast right now. This is like, I don't recall this ever in my lifetime. So when people say that climate change is not real, I mean, turn on your TV set for God's sake and see what's going on. But we also need to figure out ways to help those who are struggling, especially at the low income, be able to have the resources to be able to put food on the table for their families, because food has been impacted by that. Leanne mentioned I do a lot of work on hunger and nutrition. One of the things I support very strongly is making sure that we increase the SNAP benefit for people. It was increased slightly. It's about an average of $2.04 per person per meal. There's not much you can buy with that. We ought to adjust it appropriately. And we ought to invest in programs like the Double Up Bucks program, which allows people to be able to get double the value for their SNAP dollars if they go to farmers markets or they buy fresh produce and vegetables. So there are things like that we could do. Obviously, the child tax credit would help, and the earned income tax credit would help.
Thank you, Jim. There's not a lot to add on to Jim's very thorough answer. I will say, it's always right to point out that inflation is cooling. We're at 2.5%. That's the lowest level since February of 2021. But when we're back in our districts and we're meeting people at the grocery store, it certainly they're not really focused on those macroeconomic metrics, right? And so I think we have to be really targeted in our approach. I mean, certainly the Inflation Reduction Act, which had so many of those clean energy investments, was also aimed at, bringing our manufacturing back to the United States. That's going to help. We learned a lot during COVID about being reliant on a foreign supply chain. We learned that with medical devices, with energy certainly, also with microelectronics and semiconductors, and we've made some incredible investments to get that manufacturing back home so that it's not so volatile in the future. And then you have to look at really what's causing the most pain. And rental inflation is 5.2%, right? I mean, the cost of living just to be housed is exorbitant in our country. And so when I hear Kamala Harris out on the trail talk about $25,000 at time of signing for a first-time home buyer, increasing housing units by 3 million, giving grants to municipalities that will actually, streamline their permitting and zoning processes so that we can build more homes. I think that's the kind of thing that's going to ease that rental and housing burden. And then lastly, I'm a mom. Thank God my kids aren't in diapers anymore. But I still walk by and I look at the price. I went to a baby shower and they had the diaper raffle. And there's 2 companies that own all the diapers on that aisle, right? They might be different brands, but there's 2 companies. And for a time a few years ago, the cost of pulp in those diapers was high. But the reality is those 2 companies never brought their prices down when the cost of pulp came down. And we have to be vigilant in not allowing corporations, especially when they're in duopolies or they're colluding to keep those prices high, we can't let them get away with it. Because as I look at the grocery aisles, I see a lot of consolidation in manufacturers, and I see a lot of a correlation between those high prices. And that is a huge problem right now in our country, and one that I think we have to take steps to curtail.
Thank you both very much. Let's talk a little bit about tax cuts. Several key provisions of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act are set to expire soon, 2025, next year, and that includes the pass-through deductions that benefit many of our small businesses. And there are some ongoing discussions about the R&D tax credit and potential changes to the corporate tax rate. Can you talk a little bit about economic growth and how you see the role Congress playing in 2025?
Do you want me to start, Jim? Jim and I both voted for the bipartisan tax relief package back in January, which would have extended the R&D tax credit. We know the impact that that has on companies in our district, companies across the state of Massachusetts. That tax package would have also, I think we've already mentioned, expanded the child tax credit. It also would have strengthened the housing tax credit, low-income housing tax credit. All of that is so important, and I think Jim mentioned that Senate Republicans held that up. Part of it is, it's campaign politics at its worst. No one wants to give the Biden-Harris administration a win in an election year. This is when everyone's eyes start to roll, because now we're staring at down the barrel of an expiration of those R&D tax credits. And so absolutely we have to be looking at the lame duck post-election cycle on if we can vote on that package, if we can come together and vote on that package. I will say there's a lot that we need to do for small business. And I think that's been very gratifying to hear Kamala Harris talk about and kind of hold center on the trail in terms of what we're going to do to increase small business and entrepreneurial applications. She set a marker in the ground saying she wants to have 25 million at the end of her first term, beating the 19 million that President Biden had in this term. And I think that's a really important metric for us to follow. Increasing the startup expense deduction from $5,000 to $50,000. I mean, many of you started your own business. You know how important having that expense deduction is when you're growing a company, all those startup expenses, and then easing the burden of all the red tape, whether it's certifications or taxes, making sure that we're getting rid of the red tape so that we're fueling our economy through the creation of small business. And I think that there's a lot we can do through our tax code on that front.
Well, there's really not much I can add to that, but let me just make 2 points. One is we need some of the Trump tax cuts should be extended, some should not. We need to look at our entire tax code because I don't know about you, but I don't really think it's particularly fair. There are firefighters and police officers and teachers that are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and big corporations in this country, and there's just something inherently wrong with that. And the burden shouldn't be on the middle class or those struggling to get in the middle class. A fair share means everybody pays their fair share. So we need to take a look at that. We did some stuff in the House. We're waiting for the Senate Act. We'll see what happens. The second point I want to make is that we ought to also think about how we pay for them. I was at an event the other day, talking about the cost of hunger in this country. And somebody said, well, we can't do all the things you want to do because it will add to the debt. And I made the case that, on the contrary, I mean, if people have access to nutritious food, then we save a whole boatload of money in avoidable healthcare costs. Kids who show up at school on a Monday, having not eaten all weekend, they don't learn in school. There's a cost to that. So I can tell you that investing in programs to make sure that people have access to good nutrition is cost effective. But tax cuts don't pay for themselves no matter what everybody says, even though they say they do. The Trump tax cuts added $2.7 trillion to our debt. So those who are concerned about the debt ought to be thinking about, do we pay for them? How do we offset them? And if we extend them, we're told that it's an additional $4.8 trillion over the next 10 years. So don't talk to me about the debt when it comes to putting food on people's table or helping people get access to good health care. But then when it comes to tax cuts that benefit primarily the upper income people in this country, that we don't have to pay for it. So if I just caution as we move forward no matter who's in control of Congress or who the next president may be, that if you care about the debt, you ought to be, when you come to the discussion of tax cuts, there ought to be some conversation about how you offset them.
Thank you both. The nation's supply chain almost saw a mass disruption last week when union dock workers right here in Massachusetts began their strike. That agreement reached at the end of last week does expire soon, January 15th. Are you concerned about a concrete agreement? And what role do you think government should be playing in labor disputes?
Well, I'm grateful that the administration was able to avert a strike, and that there seems to be an acknowledgement that the dock workers deserve an increase in salary, given the fact that the shippers are making exorbitant amounts of money. So, I mean, just seems like a reasonable trade-off here. There's going to be discussions between now and January about the impact of automation on the workforce. We all want to be on the cutting edge of everything, but we need to, enter into the future with open eyes that increased automation means, and it has a negative impact on the workforce. How are we going to accommodate that? So all those things have to be talked about. But I am glad that we averted a strike. I think it would have been. We all would have felt it. I mean, everything from automobiles to toilet paper, right, would have been adversely impacted if this strike went on. I give the president and the vice president credit for being able to get the parties together. I think the salary increases for the dock workers is important. There's more to come, but I think we can get to an agreement where we can avert a shutdown of our ports.
Yep, I'll echo Jim. That was it was great work by the administration to avert the strike to continue. And I'll tell you why. One case that we were made aware of in our office was Hurricane Helene and the devastation that has caused in Georgia and North Carolina and Florida. There's a company in North Carolina called Baxter. It produces like 80% of the IV fluid in our country. And so our hospitals, and I mean, you may have even read stories about this, were immediately triaging IV fluid in all of our hospitals up here in Massachusetts. And so had the strike continued, we might not have even had access to a foreign supply of IV fluid, which really would have been disastrous for our country. And so, reason, for us to make sure that, one, we're tackling climate change, because we should not be, having disasters that shut down, industries and just causing the devastation that they do because of the severity of these storms, but also diversifying our supply chain just has to be at the top of the list. I mean, we lived through COVID. We know the lessons that we've learned there. We're making those investments, but we have to do more, because we can't cripple our hospitals with the ability to deliver care when one of these facilities goes down. And then I'll say a question I get last, like, what is the role of government in these labor disputes? Look, the Department of Labor absolutely plays a role. They have to bring the two parties together to make sure that they're negotiating in good faith. I know Jim and I have gotten involved in some local labor disputes where there's been teachers or nurses, only to elevate the people who are actually impacted when those strikes are allowed to persist, right? Patients suffer, students suffer, parents suffer, workers suffer. I mean, and so for us, it's all about getting back at the table, trying to bring sides together to find the common ground and come to a resolution that serves both sides.
Thank you. Earlier this year, there was an attempt to pass what would have been the first major bipartisan immigration reform bill. It failed to pass. Do you believe we'll have another shot at that post-November election?
I will start. I think this has been probably one of the more frustrating, questions, because, and it's been talked about on the debate stage. It's been talked about, by pundits. But we had an opportunity to pass the strongest border security and immigration reform package in our country in decades. And it was bipartisan, and it wasn't perfect. Jim and I will be the first to tell you that it wasn't perfect. But it needed to happen. And it needed to happen, one, because Massachusetts is really bearing the brunt. Massachusetts taxpayers are really bearing the brunt of, sheltering migrants who are coming to Massachusetts. And part of what was in that package was increased shelter and services dollars to help Massachusetts in that effort. But this is like a result of us kicking the can over and over. We know what happened with that bipartisan bill, one that was negotiated by one of the most conservative Republicans in the Senate and Democrats, and Trump killed it. I mean, he literally said, this is my campaign issue, it's my number one. If I can't instill fear about an open border policy that the Democrats are party to, then I can't win this election. So I think that tells you everything you need to know right now about the intention of our two parties, right? One is so committed to solving problems, to being the adults in their room, to make sure that we're making our community stronger and updating our laws, and the other just wants to campaign on this issue, has no interest in actually solving this problem. And as someone who's only been there 3 terms, I hear the partisan bickering and I see the rhetoric on the floor, and this one was just a hard one because it was, folks following up their words with an action. Basically, we're not going to solve this problem when the country is screaming at us to do it. So I'm hopeful. I know that Kamala Harris has said on many debate stages that she would sign that bill tomorrow if she had the opportunity to. And I'm hoping that we have an opportunity to tackle immigration reform in a more comprehensive way. But certainly that is a responsible first step.
So, Laurie just explained it, and it really is a tragedy because we have an opportunity to actually do something, and for political reasons it was derailed. But let me just say and remind everybody, not that anybody in this room needs to be reminded, but we are a nation of immigrants. And we all have a role to play in pushing back against the demagoguery that you hear about from certain people on a daily basis. Yeah, I mean, Haitian immigrants don't steal pets and don't eat them, right? I mean, it is a lie that gets repeated over and over and over again, and people will say, well, no one really believes it. But you know what? I've been at events in Massachusetts where people have asked me that question. And what a disservice to these Haitians, by the way, who are here on a legal status, and who are fleeing the most terrible violence in Haiti. I mean, our history has been, we have been a safe haven for people fleeing violence. To basically say that we want to shut the door on asylum applicants. By the way, to get asylum, you have to prove a well-founded fear of persecution, which is a high standard. Yes, we need to reform our laws. This bill that was drafted by a conservative Republican senator from Oklahoma would have provided additional security at our border, would have tightened up laws in some respects in ways that would make me very uncomfortable. But nonetheless, it would have passed. It would have passed the House, it would have passed the Senate, it would have been signed into law. So I'll just say one other thing too. As I travel around my district and I talk to manufacturers, I talk to people in the healthcare industry, home healthcare industry, one of the first issues they bring up to me is that they need more workers. They need people to do this work. And so we need immigrants in this country to support our economy. And I think we all, no matter what our politics may be, we have to rise to the occasion. Yeah, we need to invest to secure our border. We need to update our laws. We need orderly immigration into this country. We need to provide aid to states that are now dealing with the immigrants who are here. But let's not embrace this. Let's shut the door that somehow all immigrants are bad, or we were told, are murderers or have bad genes or whatever the hell is being talked about right now. Bottom line is, again, look at your own family history, and we should appreciate the diversity of this country and our great immigrant tradition.
We're all seeing and hearing more companies use AI. I'm using AI. I know a lot of people in this room are using AI right now. What are the biggest opportunities for our economy, the biggest threats? And do you think the government should be addressing potential displacement of workers due to the growth of
So
AI?
I think we need to do all of the above, right? I mean, we have to understand that AI is for real, that there is a potential there, that it can help make our economy more efficient, can help us in the healthcare arena in ways that, quite frankly, will benefit patients, but it also could potentially be disruptive. And so one of the things I wish Congress were doing right now, and I hope that when this political season is over with, that we are actually having more thoughtful discussions about what the promise and what, you know, and what the positives are and what the negatives are, and how do we manage it. And there's a way to manage it. There's a way to welcome in new ideas, new technologies, new innovations, and at the same time protect our workforce. And so, yeah, Congress needs to be involved in this, and quite frankly, we're behind. And we need to play some catch-up.
I agree. We are behind. We work a lot on the Energy and Commerce Committee on AI and what AI regulation could look like. I mean, certainly we've been seeing machine learning for decades. It's nothing new, but now we're seeing advancements in healthcare, as Jim mentioned. It's really easing the administrative burden on our physicians, and we really want them to be focused on delivering great health care to their patients and not filling out forms or taking their notes, transposing those notes. Just in climate mitigation, or when we think about optimizing our grid for when will different sources of energy be distributed, satellite images and probing those so that we can kind of get in front of the next severe, weather pattern. The promise of it is, it's almost too hard to describe or to articulate, but there does come a lot of risk, and we want to make sure that we're protecting people's civil rights and there aren't implicit bias in these models. We want to make sure that our payment models for healthcare, for example, keep pace. We want to make sure that we're protecting people's privacy and that we're transparent about when AI is being used. And you brought up a great point in terms of displacing workers. This is a big concern. This is what the most recent strike was all about. And we have programs. And if you talk to workers that have used the Trade Adjustment Assistant Program, so when maybe their job has been sunset because a new industry or a new technology or innovation has come up, we actually retrain those folks. We get them into apprenticeships and retraining programs, and we skill them up for another adjacent job. I think that's something that we have to really focus on and be really targeted about when we look at each industry and the impact that AI could have on workers.
Thank you. And actually, we just got a question from the audience about, it's related to AI, but about the negative effect of disinformation that spreads so quickly online.
Yeah, so this is an issue that I work a lot on. It is pretty embarrassing. I think we might have even talked about this last year. Still embarrassed that we don't have a privacy policy in our country. And we don't have a way to hold, or we don't have the will to hold tech companies accountable for the algorithms and the content that they're knowingly targeting to our kids, but to people across the globe, even if that means spreading misinformation. We have a lot of work to do in this regard. I mean, we've come so close. We've had bipartisan, comprehensive privacy bills that have passed out of our committee. Republican leadership has kind of fought with Republicans on the committee on how to bring that to the floor or whether it could be brought to the floor. When you peel back that onion, you just see all the tech lobbyist money that is getting poured into Washington to stop privacy from happening. And so the same thing is going to happen with AI. And so for us, it really is about data, how your data is shared, sold, brokered. I mean, the fact that there are data brokers that sit in between you and advertisers or websites It's a real problem because it's just the most opaque middleman that you'll never know about. But yet it's your data and you don't have any control over it, and that needs to change in our country. And so we know that the AI is going to really rely on these huge data sets, and I think a really important first step is being transparent about how your data is being used, how it's being sold, how it's being targeted, how algorithms are being targeted to you. And we've got legislation written. We've got a kids online safety bill that would actually change or have a duty of harm for our technology companies to follow when they are designing their apps for our kids. And we have a privacy policy that's written that we just need to have the willpower to say no to the tech industry and put consumers first. And so that, I think, is something that I'm optimistic about after this election, certainly, as you call it, the politics of a campaign election year, we get back to work in the 119th Congress.
And everything Laurie said, I agree with. Let me just take on this issue of disinformation that is getting out to everybody right now. There's such a thing as objective facts. And, we can look at a local economy and there are objective facts, unemployment rate, the number of jobs available, all that kind of stuff. And then we can decide what the policy should be to make that community better. I mean, that's just the way it has always kind of been in this country. Now, we don't all agree on the same objective facts because we're being fed stuff that, quite frankly, is intentionally false. I mentioned to you the question I got on immigrants stealing pets and eating dogs and cats, right? I'll tell you, I was the last person on the House floor on January 6th. I had to evacuate everybody on the House floor. When I walked into the Speaker's lobby, I came face to face with this mob. There's a video of me, like, standing there as they break the windows, and shortly after was this woman, Ashley Babbitt, was shot as they tried to storm in to get us, and they all left. Later that week, I was in Worcester at a grocery store, and I had a gentleman come up to me, he was in a business suit, maybe in his 50s or 60s, and he said, "Oh, the other day." I said, "Thank you for expressing your concern." I thought he was expressing concern. He really wasn't. He says, "No, we almost got fooled." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well," I said, "I found out what happened. I got it on a social media site. I went onto this link." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Oh, it showed what happened that day." I said, "Well, what happened that day?" He said, "It was a perfectly peaceful gathering." I said, "But I was there." And he said, "You got to look at the link." I said, "But I was there." He said, I said, "Look, we can get on an airplane right now. I can fly you to the Capitol, and you can see that the Capitol's in shambles." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "Well, I'll investigate." But, I mean, look, this guy, looked like anybody in this room. And, he didn't seem to be, off his rocker when I was talking to him, but the bottom line is he believed what was fed to him online. And there's just stuff that's being pushed online that is just not true. And as a result, people are unable to make decisions based on fact. And so it's complicated because we are the freest country in the world, right? And we want to protect people's freedoms and liberties, but there has to be some acknowledgement that some of the stuff that's being pushed to our kids and to you needs to be checked. I mean, there are things such as objective facts, and we have to acknowledge it's a problem. And it's a problem as we're leading up to this election.
Can I say one more thing, Jim? Because you buried me with that answer. I immediately went to the legislative and the wonky policy stuff, and Jim was so right to just sort of focus on how prevalent this is. And it reminded me when you were talking about how there are literally people who are saying that the government started Hurricane Helene. Have you heard that one? And so, I'm actually going to look to the students at FSU because it is so hard. It was so easy for us when we were growing up because we had, you know, a newspaper, maybe it was the Herald and the Globe, and one was more conservative than the other, or the New York Times and the Journal, but we had these trusted news sources. And we knew what their, you know, maybe their slant was on their editorial pages. But now people don't read newspapers. They get their news online, and anybody can put anything up. And when you have elected officials who share content that is wrong, it's a real big problem, and it's a hard one for you to sift through. I mean, we talk about like the shortage of time on trying to figure out like the complexity of an issue, never mind having to brush up on the source of a story to find out if it could be true or not. I mean, that is a burden that we're not going to be able to keep up with in our country. And so the flow of disinformation is what probably keeps me up at night the most, because I know just in my own family, I am debunking like things that are just false. And sometimes they sound crazy, but it doesn't matter, because if you're reading them over and over again and they're shared by people in positions that should know better, you actually, we're really in a troubling place in our society.
So no pressure, Fitchburg State students. You've got to correct this. Get on it. We appreciate it. So 2 weeks ago, and this is becoming a very common story, but you and your colleagues voted to extend government funding through December 20th and averting a shutdown. Do you anticipate that agreement being reached before the next deadline? And how much do you believe the results of the election this November will impact that agreement?
Well, I'll start, and then Jim will improve upon my answer. So I think one of the things that I like when I think about the CR right before we left, and like coming right up against a government shutdown again, and all the news stories that are written about that, and how frustrating it is for us, because we really don't want Washington to be portrayed in that way. And I think that's the reason why Democrats on a number of occasions these last 2 years we've stepped up, we've given, votes, we've come together to do the right thing. But what's really troubling about that CR vote is the 82 Republicans that voted against it. And that was like the most bipartisan vote that we've had on a funding package. 82, that's half of the Republican conference voted against it. That should worry everybody, just because it feels like the most extreme end is like starting to grow. And so I do worry about what happens after the election. We've got a lot to do in the last 2 months of this year. There's been a lot of bills that have piled up. There's a December 20th deadline that we have to, pass these appropriation bills. Otherwise, there'll be another tranche of stories right before Christmas about a shutdown. Democrats don't engage in shutdown politics. We know it's bad. It's not just bad for the economy and the communities that we represent, it's bad for us. It just doesn't look remotely responsible. So I think one of the things that I know that we're going to do is we're going to get to work on it right away. And we're going to do everything that we can to come together so that we pass these appropriations on time, and we don't burden the American public with this this story of how everyone should be on edge, and corporations and business and industry as well, because we have a job to do, and that's what people elect us to go do, and I think that's what we're committed to.
I mean, to be totally honest with you, I have no idea what the hell is going to happen when we come back, and it's really frustrating for both of us, because we both believe in like regular order, like that. Committees should hold hearings, and they should report out appropriation bills, and we should debate them and vote on them, and the Senate should do the same, and we should reconcile the differences and then vote to pass them and send them to the president for his or her signature. And that's just not the way things have been working. And the problem with with pushing it off to the very end is that, and let's be honest, unless you're a super speed reader, you're not going to know every single item that is in that omnibus bill that includes all of the appropriations bills, not one at a time, but all of them together. And then you'll find out maybe a few weeks later something in the bill that, had you known it was there, you would have said, oh God, we have to get it out. So it's just not good a way to govern. And we need to figure out how to go back to to regular order. The other thing is, I mean, we have the extension until December 20th. Some wanted to do it till March, like 15th or 17th or something like that. And, which was, again, shows kind of a disconnect between those who wanted that and what the real world is like. For the mayors and the state representatives and the other elected officials who are here, you need to know what you're getting from the federal government for the year. You can't say, oh, I'm going to start this new program with our schools, or I'm going to start this new program in terms of economic development, and then only to find out that halfway through you lose funding for the program. You need to have some certainty. Our economy needs certainty. And that's what's so awful about what is happening right now. And here's the deal. This is one of the things that Kevin McCarthy did, which was a stupid thing to do. But he wanted to be speaker so desperate, after 15 votes, he basically gave away all of his power. And he said, any one person can vote to expel the speaker anytime and as many times as they want. And anyway, he lost his job because, you know, Democrats, we wanted to work with him, but he was basically saying, I don't need you, and the Republicans get rid of him. Speaker Johnson, Marjorie Taylor Greene moved to have him removed from office. We, myself included, voted to keep Speaker Johnson, you know, and I figured, you know what, for the sake of the institution, that's a good thing. And, you know, and maybe in return, we'll have a more bipartisan kind of conversation. I was mistaken, right? The old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, won't be fooled a second time. But the bottom line is, there's a small group of hardline MAGA extremists that threaten him every day. And what they're saying to him, you know, is if you don't do what we say, we're going to move to expel you. That's not the way the institution should work. And so hopefully post-election, we can figure out a way to get back to regular order, to be able to give the speaker, whoever he or she may be, the ability to be able to govern, because it is important, and you know it matters. And sometimes we don't appreciate how much it matters until the government shuts down, and until we're not getting the services that we're all expecting to get.
Thank you, and one of our questions is related. So as we get closer to Election Day, we have seen 2 attempts on the former president's life, and we've seen legal battles surrounding the 2024 election. And as people are prepared to go and cast their ballots in just weeks, are we going to have a safe Election Day? Are we going to have a safe post-election world?
So let's be clear. I mean, the attempted assassination attempts against Donald Trump are horrific. There's no place for violence in our political system here. Violence or threats against anybody, doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't care what you are, right? I mean, we cannot tolerate that. And so in response, we all voted to increase security for everybody, but it's sad that we have to do that. But I will tell you that leaders in both parties and at every level have an obligation to not only speak the truth, but to not intentionally incite public unrest and violence. Again, I was there on January 6th. I know exactly what happened and why it happened, right? And I'm worried about a repeat of that. And I'm worried about safety on Election Day. We have we're getting reports, a lot of poll workers are saying, count me out. I'm going to vote, but I don't really want to be there, just in case. That undercuts our democracy. I mean, voting is the most American thing in the world to do. Everybody should feel secure in casting their vote. And election workers, the people who are there, who give up their time to be there all day, you know what? They are not have to worry about, are they safe? And so I think it's important for all of us, with our family and our friends and with, you know, your elected officials, you know, to every once in a while, if the rhetoric is getting a little bit too heated, to say, hey, reel it in a little bit. Reel it in a little bit. You know, people can vote for whoever the hell they want to vote for. But we all should agree that violence of any kind is unacceptable in this country, especially around our democracy.
Yes, I'm glad Jim said it. It's the first thing that any of us will say. You know, the 2 assassination attempts on former President Trump, it's reprehensible. There's no room for political violence or any violence. And so I think it's really important that we say that. And I think it's really important that we kind of go down a path where we're embracing words and language that unite us. I mean, I think one of the things that really has me worried is that you used to think in our country that there would be an event where we would band together as Americans, right? I mean, we all remember how we felt on September 11th, and you know, the weeks and the months after that. I mean, we had never been more united. And when I looked at sort of the language and the claims that came after Hurricane Helene, which was just a devastating natural disaster, where people lost their lives, they lost their businesses, their homes, their communities. It's one of those moments where you're like, oh yeah, we're all going to come together and we're going to help each other. And that didn't happen, right? We were faced with divisiveness and just along political lines, and that is just a scary undercurrent in our country right now. And I think, you know, I was there on January 6th as well, and Jim is right to point out that we are thinking about how the certification of our election is now an event, when it never used to be an event. We have fair and safe elections in our country. We've had them for since the beginning of our country, and the fact that there has been at every step of the way this year, there have been folks who are trying to undermine that confidence in the results of this election. I think it's not just elected leaders, I think it's everybody, no matter where you are, whether you're just going to cast your vote, whether you're at your dinner table, we all have to be vigilant in how that is our voice. The right and the privilege that we have to vote in our country is our like singular power. And how that is, it's a right that we can't let anybody take away from us or undermine or have that not be heard. So I think that this one's going to take all of us. You know, we know that we've got the infrastructure in place to have a fair election, and we know we've got you know, the ability to easily certify our election, and we need to hold our elected officials, whether they're in interviews or in forums like this, accountable on the answers to those questions.
Thank you both. We're going to take some more questions from the audience. Just as a reminder, you can see Travis over there. If you raise your hand and you've got a card, he'll come and pick it up from you. So let's talk about health care. I know we are concerned here in the Commonwealth, as everyone is across the country. There have been some concerning events around healthcare here in Massachusetts. I don't have to tell you both. But for us, top of the list is what happened at Neshoba Valley Hospital and with Stewart Healthcare, and also the closing of the maternity unit here. What do you think is the future, and what are you going to prioritize in Washington for healthcare?
Well, you can't get a question about healthcare in Massachusetts and not talk about Stewart, because what Stewart was able to do can never happen again. As you all know who work in healthcare, this is not a margin optimization enterprise, right? In fact, you know, I only have community hospitals in my district, and I know how hard they work on getting to black, if they ever even achieve that. So I know some hospitals that don't because of, you know, forces out of their control, like their payer mix and things like that. Look, Ralph De La Torre and his executive team, they need to be held accountable. You know, there needs to be a Department of Justice investigation, an HHS investigation, a Federal Trade Commission which oversees consumers' rights. on what they knew as they were driving these 9 hospitals in Massachusetts into the ground. Obviously, I represent the communities of Neshoba Valley Medical Center. It is closed today. And there are people in the community that are rightfully scared. It's a 40-minute drive to the next emergency room. So it's frightening to think that, we are not going to be able to help someone in time who's having who needs life-saving care. I can tell you that we're working with the governor, just episodically on this particular case, we're working closely with the governor to reopen that emergency room. She has put a ton of resources into re-equipping the ambulatory care and the first responders with more life-saving equipment, to take into account the distance to emergency care. But we can't let this part of the state become a healthcare desert. And I know anybody who's sitting in this room and saw the closing of the maternal health ward at Leominster Hospital, that's what your fear is. One of the reasons why I sit on the healthcare subcommittee, so I get to talk about and work on healthcare a lot. And we wrote the essential hospital legislation because we don't have a designation in our country for safety net hospitals. And what does that mean? That means virtually all the hospitals in Massachusetts, they're safety nets, right? There's no plan B if one goes down, bless you, Mark. And think about what that does to a community. I mean, families like the one I grew up in, we needed our health care to be close to our home. We needed those services to be, I was one of 4 girls, and we all need that. We need community hospitals to be robust and viable. When you have an essential hospital designation, the federal government can do certain things. Certainly changing the funding model is one of them, where they get resources maybe at a different ratio than some of our other hospitals. But it also allows us to explore different cost-cutting measures through pilots. Care at home, for example. These hospitals, Lawrence General, Lowell General, that Holy Family, Hayward, these are hospitals that are already trying to innovate on how to reduce their costs without hurting the quality of care. So let's give them the ability and the funds to do that so that we can find, new innovative models that we can make contagious across the board. We felt that, and we're feeling that because of the 9 Steward hospitals that went down. Luckily, I've got 2 that got picked up by Lawrence General, and there's a regional, solution there. But we're not done yet in Neshoba Valley, and we're definitely not done in terms of coming up with legislative guardrails around private equity and corporate interests taking over our healthcare delivery systems.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we've been doing this for many years, and usually the discussion on healthcare is around affordability. And we're working to lower prescription drug prices. We're trying to hold insurance companies accountable. We're trying to make sure that the federal share of reimbursement is where it needs to be, is to keep hospitals afloat. But now we're talking about not just affordability, but access. With Neshoba closing, and then there was a scare with Haywood with the bankruptcy that now seems to be turning around, and the maternity ward at Leominster being eliminated. The issue is access, and so access is just as important as affordability when you think about it. Because if you need help and you need it quick, you don't have the luxury of driving 40 minutes or longer, depending on traffic and everything else. So look, I believe that at the end of the day, the Steward team will be held accountable. But that's of little comfort, quite frankly, to the people who live in the areas where these hospitals closed down. And I think the governor is doing all that she can to try to figure out how to get things up and running again. One of the challenges is that some of these hospitals, their infrastructure is old. So trying to get someone to come in and replace, and then say I have to invest like $3 million to upgrade things is not necessarily a very attractive offer to some of these other hospitals. But then if that's the case, we need to find the capital to help make the improvements so we can get these hospitals reopened again, and that's what we're committed to.
Thank you both. The news this morning is that Florida is bracing for another historic hurricane that will be devastating, Hurricane Milton, on the heels of Helene. You spoke a little bit about this earlier. FEMA we did see increased funding for FEMA of $10 billion. What do you see as the future of FEMA and how we keep the funds robust enough to battle all these?
So my mother's in Florida. I've got friends in North Carolina I've talked to. I've talked to friends in Georgia. They are grateful for FEMA. They thank God for FEMA. And FEMA is doing, all that it can do. Thousands of people are on the ground trying to help those who have already been adversely impacted, and they are being deployed now to help those who will be adversely impacted when this latest hurricane hits Florida. We should thank FEMA for what they're doing. We should thank those who are on the ground, some of them risking their lives, doing search and rescue operations, trying to save as many lives as possible, trying to get people out of harm's way. And so, this is unprecedented, the number of storms that seem to be hitting us and the intensity of these storms. And we're going to need to provide them additional resources. And if that means Congress coming back next week or tomorrow, we all want to come back and make sure the money is there. Provide certainty to these states and to the people who are adversely impacted. They will get what they need.
Yeah, really not much to add there. That's exactly right. The $10 billion that we gave to FEMA through the CR, which 82 Republicans voted against again, will not be enough. We know it won't be enough. We're already working on a supplemental package. And look, FEMA has been called not just for these devastating storms, but we've seen them up here, the flooding last year. I mean, the map, the expanding map of weather events that FEMA has to deal with is ever growing. And so, look, in the very short term, we have to fund FEMA so that they're on the ground helping people not just recover, but also rebuild. And then certainly we have to continue with our climate mitigation and our clean energy investments, because if we keep going down this path, it's just unsustainable. I think we all know that, and we have to do more faster.
Thank you both. We're about out of time, but I want to thank you. I know how busy you both are. So Congressman Jim McGovern and Lori Trahan, thank you so much for your...
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And I also want to thank Fitchburg State University, Madam President, and students. We're looking forward to what we see next. Thank you for your sponsorship today. And big thanks to Care Central VNA and Hospice for their hard work and sponsorship. And our AV sponsor, Central Mass Productions, for their support. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.